Hello everyone. Here I am speaking on the behalf of Department of English, MAC Arts and Science College. Here today I have come up with a topic from your paper Ways with Words. So we are going to deal a poem today. So the name of the poem is Once Upon a Time. This is the title of the poem Once Upon a Time, and we are going to discuss the introductory part of this poem today. And we will do the later part. We will discuss the poem, the exact lines of the poem later. So let us discuss about the author and the introductory area first of all. You can see Gabriel Okara. He has written this poem called Once Upon a Time. From the title itself, we can read something. Once upon a time. So it's about all a time that had something. A golden time. So let us see what happens in this poem tomorrow or the day after tomorrow in another video lecture. So the introduction, we can read and we can discuss everything, every line. So Gabriel Imotini Okara, he was born in the year 1921 and he is still alive. So the year is not the 1921, is his birth year. So he is a Nigerian poet and novelist who was born in Bemonte in Yengwa, Bayelsa State, Nigeria. So this is all about his birthplace and his state and his country. The first modernist poet of Anglophone in Africa. So Anglophone means the people who speak English in a foreign country, in a non-English country, non-English speaking country. So Britain, America is actually an English speaking country, but Africa is not. They have their own language. But the Anglophone poet, the first modernist poet of Anglophone Africa, Gabriel Okara. He is best known for his early experimental novel. So he had done many experimentations to write novels. So one of the major, his first novel that had a successful beginning is The Voice. The Voice is his first novel and he has written that novel as an experiment. ഒരു പരീക്ഷണാടിസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ അദ്ദേഹം എഴുതിയിട്ട് വിജയിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു നോവലാണ് The Voice, 1964. And his award-winning poetry published The Fisherman's Invocation. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ അവാർഡൊക്കെ കിട്ടിയിട്ടുള്ളൊരു കവിതയാണ് The Fisherman's Invocation in the year 1978. And his another important poem is The Dreamer. So we are getting some details about the author's birthplace, and after that we are getting some details on his important works, on his first works. His Vision is another work, Vision, in 2005. Okara incorporated African thought, religion, folklore and imagery into both his verse and prose. So when we read his verses means his poetry, his poems. When we read his prose means the short stories and the fiction, the novels that he has written. So when we read the verses and proses from this author, Gabriel Okara, we can see the incorporation, we can see the togetherness of the ideas of African thought. He has included the African thought, the African people's thought in his world works, and the religious background of Africa and the religious aspect of Africa in his works, and the folklore in Africa. Folklore means the mythology that are based on the native places, and the song that includes a mythological element. Okay, and he has been called the Nigerian negritudeist. So important. You might have been a question. You can expect a question who is called as Nigerian negritudeist. So you can answer Gabriel Okara, and one of the founders of modern Nigerian and African literature. So there are many founders. There are many basic writers for being a course of a beautiful realm for this African and Nigerian literature. So he is one of them. He is one of the basement. So he served as a link between colonial poetry and the vigorous modernist writing that began to appear in Nigeria around the time of national independence in 1960. So in 1960, the national independence has arrived as risen in Nigeria. And what happens? This person, Gabriel Okara, he had been a connection, a link between the colonial poetry. Colonial poetry is a type of poetry which deals the something about the colonialism and the colonial thought. Okay, you can see colonialism and colonial thought, and the result is colonial literature in English literature. So this person was a connection between colonial poetry and the vigorous, the enthusiastic, the energetic modernist poetry. So the modernist writing is very important in the new world. So the modernist poetry became more successful rather the old poetry. So he was the connection between this colonial poetry and the modernist poetry. Modernist poetry includes many thoughts, many ideas that proves that there is no any kind of meaning to any existence. So something based on philosophical ideas you don't have to understand now. Let's move. In addition to a novel and several books of poetry, Okara has published two collections of children's poetry. So he has written two collections of children's poetry. We can see what are them. First one, Little Snake and Little Frog in 1992. Second one, An Adventures to Juju Island in 1992 itself. So this is all about his personal details and his important works. Okay, let's move to the next paragraph. We are dealing on page number 42. You can see the page number here. I am taking actually I have taken this picture from your book. This is actually your textbook Ways with Words. Okay. Gabriel Okara can be considered as a highly original and uninfluenced by other poets. So there are many poets in literature, you can see, and each poet or most of the poets are influenced by other poets. John Milton is a great poet. He is influenced by the ancient poet. So ഓരോരോ കവികളും മറ്റുള്ള കവികളാൽ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് ചെയ്യപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ട്. ഓക്കെ, മറ്റുള്ള കവികളിൽ നിന്ന് ഒരുപാട് ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് കിട്ടിയിട്ടാണ് ഇവർ എഴുതുന്നത്. But this person, Gabriel Okara, can be considered as a highly original, which means we cannot see any influence of older poet or any influence of ancient poets. So he is a pure one, he is an original one. And he has been extremely successful in capturing the moods, sights and sounds of Africa. So he has been very successful in it. For what? For capturing, for describing the moods of Africa, the sights of Africa, the sounds of Africa throughout his poetry and novels. Okay, his poems show great sensitivity, perceptive judgment and a tremendous energy. So we can see in his poetry, when we read his poetry, some great sensitivity, some great things, some great ideas that are connected with the sensitivity that creates sensuous appearance, that creates sensuousness, and perceptive judgments to some rules, judgments on some cultural aspects. സമൂഹത്തിലുള്ള പല കാര്യങ്ങളെയും ജഡ്ജ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു തരം രീതി അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ കവിതകളിൽ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. ആൻഡ് ട്രമെൻഡസ് എനർജി, വളരെ ബൃഹത്തായ ഒരു എനർജി അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ കവിതകളിൽ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ കവിതകൾ വായിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് അത്രത്തോളം ഒരു എനർജി നമ്മളുടെ മൈൻഡിന് കിട്ടുന്നുണ്ട്. Okara also shows a concern on the topic of what happens when the ancient culture of Africa is faced with modern Western culture. At the time modern Western culture reached in Africa, the African people faced this modern Western culture and the consequences and how the Africans faced it. Such a things we can also see in his works. Okay, so in his works we can also see, or the person The author shows us what happens when the ancient culture of Africa is faced with modern Western culture. So the conflict between those two cultures that we can see in his poetry. Okay, so look at the next paragraph. The poem Once Upon a Time, written by Gabriel Okara, illustrates the changes a father has been seen in him throughout his life, which has been influenced by the way society has changed. So it's all about a person, an older person, and who has been looking to him himself, and he realized that some changes are going on him. ഓക്കെ വയസ്സായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരാൾ തന്നിൽ തന്നെ നോക്കിയിട്ട് തനിക്ക് വരുന്ന മാറ്റങ്ങൾ, കാലാന്തരങ്ങളെ കൊണ്ട് തനിക്ക് വരുന്ന മാറ്റങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് ചിന്തിച്ചിട്ട് അതെല്ലാം നോക്കിക്കാണുന്ന ഒരു പോമാണ്. ഓക്കെ, ഈ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ എങ്ങനെയുള്ളതാണെന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്? ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ്ഡ് ബൈ ദ വേ സൊസൈറ്റി ഹാസ് ചേഞ്ച്ഡ്. സമൂഹം, സൊസൈറ്റി മാറുന്നതിനനുസരിച്ച് തങ്ങളിൽ മാറ്റം വരുന്നുണ്ട്. ഓക്കെ, ആ മാറ്റങ്ങളൊക്കെയാണ് അദ്ദേഹം വിലയിരുത്തുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ, ലെറ്റ്സ് മൂവ് ടു ദ നെക്സ്റ്റ് പേജ്. Okay, in his poem, Okara laments the most innocence of youth. So this poem is all about the laments of innocence of youth, the lamenting on innocence that had in youth and that perished when the person become adult. നമ്മൾ അഡൾട്ട് ആവുന്ന സമയത്ത് ആ ഒരു ഇന്നസെൻസ് നമ്മളിൽ നിന്ന് നഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്നു. അപ്പം അങ്ങനെ നഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്ന ആ ഒരു ഇന്നസെൻസിന് യൂത്തിൽ നമുക്കുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആ ഒരു യൂത്ത് ആവുന്ന സമയത്ത് നമുക്ക് ആ ഒരു ഇന്നസെൻസ് നഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്നു. ചൈൽഡ്ഹുഡിലാണ് നമുക്ക് ഇന്നസെൻസ് ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത്. ആ നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ട ഇന്നസെൻസിനെ ഓർത്ത് ദുഃഖിക്കുന്ന ഒരു കാവ്യമാണ്. ഓക്കെ, ഇൻ ഇറ്റ് ഹി കണ്ടംസ് ദ ഹൈപ്പോക്രസി ഓഫ് അഡൾട്ട്സ്. മുതിർന്ന ആളുകളാകുമ്പോൾ നമ്മളുടെ ഉള്ളിൽ ക്രിയേറ്റ് ആവുന്ന ഹൈപ്പോക്രസി, ഒരുതരം ഫേക്ക്നെസ്, അതിനെയാണ് ഈ പോയട്രിയിൽ ഇദ്ദേഹം കുറ്റം പറയുന്നത് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കുറ്റപ്പെടുത്തുന്നത്. ആ ഒരു കാപ്പട്യത്തെ, hemmed in and constrained by rules and conventions. ഓക്കെ, അതുപോലെ ഒരു ഏജ് ആകുന്ന സമയത്ത് ഒരുപാട് റൂൾസ് ആൻഡ് റെഗുലേഷൻസ് ആളുകൾ ഫേസ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വരുന്നുണ്ട്. ഒരുപാട് റൂൾസ്, നിയമങ്ങൾ ആളുകൾ, നമുക്കറിയാം when this corona pandemic actually happens, the old people get more anxiety because whether they don't know they can survive or not. Okay, so hemmed in and constrained by rules and conventions, adopting masks for different occasions for lying, cheating and betraying, whereas childhood is portrayed as a time of honest laughter and spontaneity. So it's all about childhood and the beauty of the childhood and the purity of the childhood and the honesty of the childhood. There is no any cheating, there is no any betraying each other. So childhood is everything that we can see, a purity, a truth, a honest. So the poet laments, the person Gabriel Okara laments on his childhood, and he laments on the loss of innocence in his youth, when a person becomes his youth, rich in youth. Okay, look at the next line. The speaker reminiscence about a time when people were sincere and caring in their dealings with one another. So the speaker actually reminiscence, അദ്ദേഹം സ്മരിക്കുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് പണ്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരു സമയം. ആ സമയത്ത് ആളുകളൊക്കെ പരസ്പരം ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് ഒരു നല്ല കെയറിങ്ങിൽ ഡീലിംഗ് ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തിട്ട് നല്ല കെയറിങ്ങിൽ ജീവിച്ചിരുന്ന ഒരു സമയത്തെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് അദ്ദേഹം സ്മരിക്കുന്നത്. And now he cannot say that time. The time has changed to a worse one, from a good to worse. Okay, he speaks regretfully about the present time when people are not like before. So people completely changed right now, and the purity that we can see in old and ancient days. He seems to feel that people have lost the innocence and opens which he now sees in his young son. He wants to regain that innocence. So the poet wants to retake the innocence through his young son. So the poet, the speaker here has a young child, a young son, and the speaker wants to regain the innocence again through his child, through his young son. Okay, അപ്പോൾ തൻ്റെ കുട്ടിയിലൂടെ സ്പീക്കർ ഈ ഒരു സമയത്ത് ആ ഒരു പണ്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്ന തൻ്റെ ചെറുപ്പകാലത്ത് താൻ അനുഭവിച്ചിരുന്ന ആ ഒരു ഹോണസ്റ്റി, ആ ഒരു ബ്യൂട്ടിയെ സ്പീക്കർ തൻ്റെ മകനിലൂടെ ഇന്ന് നോക്കിക്കാണാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ തൻ്റെ മകനിലൂടെ അതെനിക്ക് വേണം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അദ്ദേഹം അങ്ങനെ ഒരു മൈൻഡിലാണ് നിൽക്കുന്നത്. Okay, let's move to the next paragraph. Gabriel Okara speaks about Africa's cultural changes with the coming of Western culture. We can see also the difference between this Western and this African culture, and it's changing. When the Western culture reached in Africa, we can see some changes there. So poet is also shows those things in this poetry. We can see as well as the innocence and the connection between the innocence and youth, as well as we can see these kinds of things, which means the cultural changes. Okay, the poet uses this poem to convey his feelings about the loss of traditional African culture against Western influences. So poet is actually trying to convey his feelings about the loss of traditional African culture has lost. So the poet wants to tell to the world the African culture has lost by the arriving of the Western culture. Now the people in Africa follow the Western. So the African culture has perished, has vanished from Africa. So poet laments on that also. Okay, he explains what happens when a traditional African culture meets the forces of the Western way of life. And he actually describes us about the conflicts when the traditional African culture meets with the Western culture, with the Western way of life, with the Western style of life. Okay, the overall theme of this poem is about happier times gone past and hopes for a happy ending. So the overall theme, this poem is all about what? All about happier times gone past. പണ്ട് കഴിഞ്ഞു പോയിട്ടുള്ള ആ ഒരു സന്തോഷം നിറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ള ആ ഒരു സമയത്തെക്കുറിച്ചൊക്കെയാണ് ഈ കവിത പറയുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് ഹോപ്സ് ഫോർ എ ഹാപ്പി എൻഡിങ്. സോ ദ സ്പീക്കർ ആക്ച്വലി വെയിറ്റ്സ് ഫോർ ഡെത്ത്. എൻഡിങ് എന്ന് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത് നമുക്കറിയാം, ഓൾഡ് ഏജ് ആയാലും പിന്നെ ഉള്ളത് എൻഡിങ്, മരണമാണ് വരാനുള്ളത്. ഓക്കെ, സോ ആൻഡ് ഹോപ്സ് ഫോർ എ ഹാപ്പി എൻഡിങ്. സോ ദ സ്പീക്കർ വാണ്ട്സ് ടു എൻഡ് വിത്ത് എ ഹാപ്പിനെസ്, എ ഡെത്ത് വിത്ത് ഹാപ്പിനെസ്. ഓക്കെ, ഫോർ വിച്ച് ദ റൈറ്റർ ലോങ്സ് ഫോർ, as in a fairy tale, and therefore the uses of once upon a time as the title of this poem. So we can see the title once upon a time, it represents many things. ആ ഒരു ടൈറ്റിൽ നിന്ന് ഒരുപാട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ നമുക്ക് റീഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. സോ നമ്മളുടെ പോയിറ്റ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സ്പീക്കർ ഇവിടെ ചെയ്യുന്നത് എന്താ വെച്ചാൽ, നമുക്കറിയാം ഒരു ഓൾഡ് ഏജ് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ പിന്നെ മരണത്തിന് നമ്മൾ വി ബിലോങ് ടു ഡെത്ത്. മരണത്തിനോടാണ് നമ്മൾ കാത്തിരിക്കുന്നത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മരണത്തെ കാത്തിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഓക്കെ, പിന്നെ അവിടെ ലാസ്റ്റ് പറയുന്നത് ഇതിൻ്റെ ടൈറ്റിലിൻ്റെ സിഗ്നിഫിക്കൻസിനെ കുറിച്ച് ജസ്റ്റ് പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. ആസ് ഇൻ എ ഫെയറി ടെയിൽ ആൻഡ് ദെർഫോർ ദ യൂസ് ഓഫ് വൺസ് അപ്പോൺ എ ടൈം. വി ക്യാൻ സീ വെൻ വി റീഡ് എ ഫെയറി ടെയിൽ, the beginning of most fairy tale begins like this, once upon a time, like that. So we can see the title and we can read many things from the title itself. Okay, so we have discussed the important area about the author, his important works, and what about this poem. This poem is telling about what? African and Western culture and its complications when they meet together, and the youth and the childhood, and the complications and the conflicts when the innocence of childhood meets the innocence of childhood meets the hypocrisy of adultsന്റെ ആ ഒരു കാപട്യം, അതിനെക്കുറിച്ചൊക്കെ പറയുന്നു. ഇന്നസെൻസിൻ്റെ ചൈൽഡ്ഹുഡിൽ നമുക്ക് ഉള്ള ഇന്നസെൻസ്, അതിൻ്റെ പ്യൂരിറ്റി. സോ ദിസ് പോയം ഈസ് ഓൾ അബൌട്ട് എവറിഥിങ്. Okay, so let us deal the particular poem on the next class, on the very next class. Do not worry about it. So for now we are just winding up the session. Okay, and we can meet later. Okay, bye.